Hello and welcome to the Friday, August 22nd, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Baltimore, Maryland. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Incident Response. Well, today's diary by Xavier actually is just about a topic that I covered today in class, and that's the use of the -n switch in many packet utilities like a tcpdump, a tshark, and the like. It's one of those few cases where the switch is actually fairly standardized. And that switch -n typically means that any IP addresses are not reversed resolved. Oddly enough, tcpdump does it by default without the -n switch, which of course is risky from an opsec point of view because the attacker will often receive these requests because they're in charge of the IP address space from which the request originates. So they may actually have access to the authoritative name server for that particular subnet. I personally actually like the Wireshark solution best. Wireshark is able to parse the packet capture for any DNS requests that were already captured and use them to basically build a lookup table for IP address and host names. That's actually quite neat because it also does it then at the time the packet capture was collected, not days later or weeks later when, of course, these relationships may have changed. So keep that in mind, -n, important switch for many tools, and Xavier is going a little bit more detail about which tools are covered here and also about some of the risks that you are exposing yourself if you're not doing the -n switch. Well, for users of Commvault, your data resilience solution may not be as secure or resilient as the vendor made you believe. watchTowr has a great write-up in its usual somewhat funny and tongue-in-cheek style, showing how several new vulnerabilities can be used to essentially compromise this product. Some interesting things like, for example, command injection in the login process can be used to bypass authentication, and then additional vulnerabilities can later be used for arbitrary remote code execution. Interesting set of vulnerabilities. Definitely, if you're into developing sort of these complex web applications, some good lessons to learn from these particular mistakes. So definitely take a look at that if you are developing authentication processes and such. Even if you're not a Commvault user, just better to learn from someone else's mistake than making them yourself. And for everybody using Commvault, well, better patch and patch quickly. And Docker released a new version of Docker Desktop, fixing a critical vulnerability in Docker Desktop. This vulnerability could allow container escape, where an attacker who's running code inside a container could use the access to actually then attack the host the container is running on. Again, this depends on also using Docker Desktop, and of course, as usual, is in particular important for people using containers for malware analysis or even for doing things that is often done, like, for example, sanitizing any files before they're being used and relying on the container to actually provide some additional security. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking and recommending this podcast. Thanks for subscribing, and talk to you again on Monday.